Beneath the fractured moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of an ancient scroll, whispering secrets that no living heart dared to claim. Ilara's world had always been one of shadows and chains, but the exile came like a winter gale, stripping away the fragile illusions of belonging. She huddled in the frost-laced underbelly of the Blackthorn Citadel, where the wind howled through iron-barred crevices like the lament of forgotten wolves. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and decay, a chill that seeped into her bones, turning her veins to ice even as her undead pulse thrummed faintly against the curse that bound her. Vampire, slave, Omega. The words were brands etched into her soul, deeper than the silver collar that encircled her throat, its links etched with runes that burned whenever she dared to dream of freedom. She had been cast out, not by decree, but by indifference, a quiet banishment from the heart of the pack that once claimed her as kin. Born to the fringes of the lunar clans, Ilara's blood had turned cold in her youth, tainted by a forbidden bite during a raid on the shadowed borders. The Alphas called it abomination, a stain on their pure lineage. Her own sire, a beta warrior, had dragged her before the council under the full moon's merciless gaze, his eyes averted as he renounced her. "She is no longer of our blood," he had growled, the words slicing through her like fangs. They stripped her of her name, her place, and sold her to the Citadel's underlords as a laborer in the forbidden archives, eternal servitude for one who could not die but could suffer endlessly. Now, whispers rippled through the slaves' quarters like ripples on a frozen pond. The Alpha King, Thorn Blackthorn himself, had issued a proclamation that echoed from the spires above. He sought a reader for the ancient scrolls, relics unearthed from the catacombs beneath the mountains, scrolls said to hold the key to breaking an age-old curse that gnawed at his realm. "To whoever deciphers their tongue," the heralds had boomed, their voices carrying on the biting wind, "I offer my hand, freedom, alliance, a place at my side." Laughter had followed among the guards, for who among the wretched could unravel the dead languages of gods and demons? But Ilara's fingers trembled as she clutched the hem of her tattered cloak, the coarse wool doing little to ward off the perpetual cold that haunted her kind. The symbol of her isolation lay heavy against her chest, a small, crimson-stained locket pilfered from the archives in a moment of desperate rebellion. Inside, a flake of dried blood from the first vampire elder, said to pulse with forgotten knowledge. It had been her mother's, passed down in secret before the exile tore them apart. The locket warmed faintly against her skin now, as if sensing the stirrings of possibility. Ilara had spent centuries in the dim glow of tallow lamps, her eyes, sharp and unblinking in the dark, tracing the faded inks of tomes long buried. The scrolls called to her, their edges frayed and veined with what looked like solidified blood, symbols that danced like moonlight on water in her mind. She rose from her pallet of straw, the chains at her ankles clinking softly, a sound swallowed by the distant wivios of the pack patrolling the outer walls. The citadel loomed around her, its halls a labyrinth of ice-veined marble and flickering torchlight, where shadows twisted into shapes of snarling beasts. Ilara moved like a ghost through the lower levels, her bare feet silent on the flagstones, slick with meltwater from the eaves. The wind pressed against her, carrying the metallic tang of impending snow, and she pulled her cloak tighter, feeling the locket's weight as a reminder of all she had lost. Rejection had hollowed her, leaving a void where warmth once flickered, a Omega's innate pull toward the pack, now twisted into an eternal hunger that no blood could sate. In the grand archive above, guarded by sentinels with eyes like polished steel, the scrolls waited. Ilara had glimpsed them once, during a grueling shift hauling crates of moldering parchments. They were bound in hides that smelled of earth and antiquity, their script a weave of lunar glyphs and vampiric sigils, languages she alone among the slaves could parse. The guards had laughed when she lingered, mistaking her pallor for fear. "Back to your hole, bloodsucker," one had snarled, shoving her with the butt of his spear. But in that moment, under the arched ceiling, where moonlight filtered through narrow slits like silver blades, Alara had felt a spark, a defiant curiosity blooming in the frost of her heart. As the night deepened, the citadel stirred with unrest. Rumors spoke of Thorn's desperation. The king, once a conqueror whose roars shook the mountains, now haunted by guilt from a betrayal that had cost him his mate and weakened his rule. Rival packs circled like wolves scenting frailty, their howls mingling with the wind's mournful cry. Alara paused at the base of the spiral stair leading to the archives, her breath visible in faint ethereal wisps despite her undead state. The locket thrummed again, warmer now, as if urging her forward. What was strength, if not the choice to reach for light in endless night? She had been left to wither, but the scrolls promised more, a chance to read her own redemption. With a steadying breath, she ascended, the chains dragging like echoes of her past. The air grew heavier, laced with the scent of aged paper and faint, coppery blood. Torch flames danced on the walls, casting elongated shadows that whispered of destinies entwined. Alara's heart, though silent, ached with the weight of what might come, the fear of hope, the terror of being seen. In the exile's grip, she was adrift, but the moon above watched, patient and unyielding, as if the goddess herself awaited the turning of the page. The torchlight flickered like hesitant breaths in the archive's vaulted chamber, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the stone walls as if desperate to escape the weight of secrets long entombed. Ilara's chains whispered against the flagstones, with each cautious step, a fragile rhythm swallowed by the vast silence of the room. The air hung heavy, saturated with the musty perfume of crumbling vellum and the faint metallic undercurrent of blood, old blood, seeped into the very fibers of the scrolls that now lay unfurled upon a pedestal of blackened oak. Moonlight slanted through the high, narrow windows, silvering the edges of the ancient texts, turning their glyphs into a constellation of forgotten stars. She approached slowly, her pale fingers hovering above the hides, afraid to touch yet drawn inexorably, as if the locket at her throat pulsed in harmony with the parchment's hidden pulse. The crimson stain within it seemed to deepen, warming her chilled skin like a distant hearth. Centuries of isolation had honed her sight to pierce the gloom, and now those eyes, emerald-flecked with the void, traced the swirling sigils. They were not mere ink. They writhed like veins beneath flesh, lunar runes intertwined with vampiric curses, speaking of a pact forged in the goddess's shadow, a binding that had cursed the Blackthorn line with endless winter in their souls. Alara's breath caught, ethereal and unseen, as the words unfolded in her mind. The scrolls chronicled the fall of Thorn's ancestors, a king who had spilled the blood of an Omega seer to claim dominion, only to invite the Deuce's wrath, a frost that withered packs and turned hearts to stone. The curse demanded a reader pure of intent, one whose own exile mirrored the betrayed, to unravel the knot of guilt and blood. Her lips parted in silent awe, she, the outcast vampire, the slave whose veins ran cold, could voice the incantation. But freedom? Alliance? The king's hand extended to one like her. Doubt coiled in her chest, sharp as the silver collar's bite, for hope was a blade that cut deepest when wielded by the Forsaken. A low growl shattered the hush, rumbling from the shadowed alcove beyond the pedestal. Alara froze, her body coiling like a shadow in the wind, as a figure emerged from the gloom. He was no guard, no sentinel, Thorn Blackthorn himself, the Alpha King, his form towering yet bowed, as if the mountain's weight pressed upon his shoulders. His fur-lined cloak hung ragged, stained with the dark blooms of recent wounds, and his eyes, storm gray, rimmed with the exhaustion of sleepless nights, locked onto her with predatory intensity. The air thickened with his scent, pine and iron, alpha musk laced with the bitter tang of sorrow, a king marked by the ghosts of choices that echoed like weavos in the night. "Who dares trespass here?" His voice was a gravelly thunder, restrained yet laced with the raw edge of desperation. He stepped forward, moonlight glinting off the silver torque at his neck, a relic of his coronation now dulled by frost. Blood trickled from a gash across his forearm, fresh from some skirmish in the halls above, where rivals tested his fraying rule. Guilt shadowed his features, etching lines deeper than any claw. The mate he had failed, lost to betrayal's blade, her death a wound that festered in his realm's heart. Ilara's instincts screamed to flee, her omega core recoiling from the alpha's dominance even as a forbidden pull stirred, instinctive and unwelcome, like moonlight thawing ice. She lowered her gaze, chains clinking as she knelt instinctively, the locket pressing hot against her breastbone. I am no trespasser, my king," she murmured, her voice a silken thread in the chill air. A slave from the depths, summoned by duty to tend the archives. Lies woven with truth. She could not confess the audacity that had drawn her here, the locket's insistent thrum urging her to claim what rejection had denied. Thorn's nostrils flared, scenting the anomaly in her. The cold blood that marked her as other, yet the subtle omega fragrance that lingered beneath, twisted by her curse. He circled her slowly, his boots crunching on scattered flakes of ancient dust, the torch flames leaping as if in fear. A slave? In this sanctum? His tone softened fractionally, curiosity piercing the melancholy that cloaked him like perpetual fog. He had come alone, evading his counsel's watchful eyes, driven by the curse's relentless gnaw, visions of his mate's final gaze, accusing and forgiving in equal measure. What was strength, if not seeking redemption in the dark? She lifted her chin then, meeting his eyes for a breath-stealing instant, and in that collision, something shifted, an electric thread, denied yet undeniable, born of shared exile in their souls. Fear warred with curiosity in her chest, the wind rattling the window slits like distant howls, carrying the scent of approaching snow. Thorn paused, his hand, scarred and steady, reaching out as if to steady himself, but he withdrew it, rationalizing the pull as weakness. "Speak, then. What do these shadows say to one such as you?" Ilara's fingers brushed the scroll, the glyphs igniting under her touch, and she began to read, her voice weaving the ancient tongue into the air like smoke from a sacred fire. Words of blood and moon, of curses broken by unlikely hands. Thorn listened, transfixed, the warmth of her proximity a balm against his frost-bitten guilt. Yet as the revelation dawned, so did the peril. Footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond, rival spies drawn by the king's solitary vigil. The connection flickered, fragile as a flame in the gale, resisted by the walls of duty and shame that hemmed them both. In that suspended moment, under the fractured moon's watchful eye, Ilara felt the locket pulse like a second heart, binding their fates in crimson threads. The wind howled louder, snow beginning to sift through the cracks, blanketing the chamber in white silence as shadows closed in. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The shadows in the archive coiled tighter as the footsteps grew into a thunderous cadence, echoing off the vaulted stones like the approach of a storm unleashed. Ilara's voice faltered mid-incantation, the ancient words dissolving on her tongue as Thorn's hand shot out, clamping over her mouth with a gentleness that belied his alpha strength. His palm was warm against her chilled lips, rough with calluses from battles long past, and in that fleeting contact, she tasted the salt of his fresh blood, a crimson thread that mirrored the locket's pulse against her chest. Fear surged through her like ice in her veins, but beneath it, an unwelcome spark. His proximity, the raw scent of pine and iron enveloping her, stirring the omega instincts she had long suppressed. Quiet, he breathed, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that pinned her in place. The air between them crackled, charged with the unspoken, the instinctive pull of alpha to omega, twisted by her curse and his guilt, denied by the walls they had both built against the world. Thorn's gaze flickered to the corridor's arched maw, where torchlight danced erratically, heralding the intruders. Rivals, he knew. Whispers of betrayal had plagued his court since the night his mate fell, her blood staining the snow under a traitorous blade. Now they came for the scrolls, for the weakness he could not hide. Alara's heart, if it could be called that in her undead state, thrummed in echo of the locket, its warmth spreading like a slow thaw through her frost-bound limbs. She nodded once, her chains a faint clink as she pressed closer to the pedestal, the scroll's glyphs still glowing faintly under her touch as if reluctant to relinquish their secrets. Thorn released her, his fingers lingering a fraction too long, tracing the edge of her jaw before he withdrew, rationalizing the touch as mere strategy. What was this pull, if not a trick of the curse? He had sworn off such bonds after his loss, his soul a barren winter plain where no flower could root. The first intruder burst through the threshold, a beta enforcer from the rival Silverfang pack, his fur cloak dusted with snow, eyes gleaming with feral ambition. Two more followed, their boots crunching on the frost-laced floor, blades drawn and glinting like fangs in the moonlight. "The king seeks solitude in the dark," the leader snarled, his voice a guttural rasp laced with mockery. "But we scent opportunity in his shadows. Hand over the scrolls, Blackthorn, or we'll carve the knowledge from your veins." Thorn rose to his full height, a low growl rumbling from his chest, vibrating through the chamber like distant thunder. The torch flames leaped higher, casting his silhouette as a monolith of shadowed fury, yet Alara saw the weariness in the set of his shoulders, the guilt that weighed heavier than any crown. He stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the threat, his body a barrier of muscle and resolve. "You trespass on sacred ground," he rumbled, his voice steady despite the blood still seeping from his arm, staining the stone in dark rivulets. "The Deuce's words are not for thieves." The beta laughed, a harsh bark that shattered the hush, and lunged, his blade slicing the air with a whistle. Thorn met him mid-stride, their clash a visceral symphony of grunts and steel, the impact reverberating through Alara's bones. She shrank back, her chains limiting her flight, but the locket burned hotter now, urging her not to cower. The air filled with the metallic tang of blood, Thorn's, the intruders, as the king twisted, driving his elbow into the beta's throat with a crack that echoed like breaking ice. The second attacker circled, feinting low, but Thorn anticipated, his scarred hand seizing the man's wrist and snapping it with brutal efficiency. Pain etched his features, not from the wounds, but from the echo of his past. Every strike a reminder of the mate he had failed to protect, her final breath a whisper of forgiveness he could not claim. Alara's breath came in shallow wisps, the cold wind from the slits howling in sympathy, snowflakes spiraling inward like lost souls. She could have fled into the deeper shadows, her vampiric grace allowing her to vanish unseen. But something held her. The king's solitary stand, his melancholy aura wrapping around her like a tattered cloak. Empathy stirred, unbidden, transforming the fear into a fragile thread of connection. He fought not for glory, but for redemption, his every move a defiance of the guilt that chained him tighter than her silver collar. What was strength, if not choosing to shield the forsaken, even when the world deemed them unworthy? The third intruder broke through, aiming for the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the scrolls. Panic surged in Alara's chest, but instinct overrode it. She lunged, chains rattling, her pale hand snatching a fallen dagger from the floor. The blade was heavy, unfamiliar in her grasp. Centuries of servitude had dulled her to violence, but she drove it upward as he reached for the parchments, the point grazing his side. He howled, staggering back, blood blooming crimson on his tunic, a color that resonated with the locket's stain. Thorn finished him with a swift strike, the body crumpling into the gathering snow like a discarded shadow. Panting, the king turned to her, his chest heaving, eyes widening at the sight of the dagger in her trembling hand. Blood, hot, vital, splattered her cloak, its warmth seeping through the wool, awakening a hunger she had long starved. Yet it was not the thirst that held her gaze, but the raw vulnerability in his, the alpha, broken by loss, seeing her not as slave or monster, but as ally in the fray. "You fought," he murmured, stepping closer, the space between them shrinking to mere breaths. The wind wailed outside, Weavos joining the chorus from the distant peaks, as if the packs sensed the shifting tides. Ilara dropped the dagger, her fingers numb, the locket's pulse sinking with the faint throb in her temples. "I could not let them take it," she whispered, her voice laced with the tremor of uncharted emotion. The connection deepened, no longer mere instinct, but a bond forged in shared peril, empathy blooming amid the blood and frost, resisted yet undeniable. Thorn reached out again, this time clasping her forearm, his touch steadying them both. Guilt flickered in his eyes, mingled with a dawning wonder. In her, the outcast, he glimpsed a mirror to his own exile from peace. The chamber fell silent save for the settling snow, blanketing the fallen in white mercy. They stood together, the scrolls secure, the night pressing close. But the footsteps had been a harbinger. Greater threats loomed in the citadel's labyrinthine heart. Thorn's hand lingered, a promise unspoken, as the moon above fractured further, casting its light on wounds yet to heal. In that refuge of stone and shadow, tenderness stirred amid the pain, a fragile flame against the encroaching dark. The snow drifted inward, like silent confessions, veiling the fallen bodies in a shroud of white forgiveness, as if the moon itself sought to hush the violence that had stained the archive's stones. Ilara stood motionless, her chains a cold weight against her ankles, the dagger's hilt still warm from her grip where it lay discarded at her feet. The air hummed with the aftermath, the coppery reek of blood mingling with the crisp bite of frost, torch flames sputtering as wind clawed through the slits, carrying distant howls that mourned the night's toll. Thorn's hand remained on her forearm, his touch a anchor in the swirling chaos, rough and vital, stirring something deep within her. A flicker of warmth against the eternal chill that defined her existence. She pulled away gently, not from revulsion, but from the fear of what that contact awakened, an Omega's longing, long buried under layers of rejection and curse, now surfacing like blood through snow. Her emerald eyes, shadowed by lashes pale as frost, met his storm-gray gaze, and in that exchange she saw the fracture in him, the king who ruled with iron will, yet knelt before ghosts of his own making. Guilt etched his features, deeper than the fresh gashes across his skin, a melancholy that mirrored her exile. "You should not have stayed," he said, his voice low, threaded with gravel and unspoken regret. He released her, turning to the scrolls as if they could shield him from the vulnerability she had witnessed. Blood from his wounds dripped onto the pedestal, pooling in crimson rivulets that traced the glyphs like veins awakening. Ilara knelt beside the parchments, her fingers trembling as they brushed the hides once more. The locket at her throat burned hotter, its crimson core pulsing in rhythm with her faint, undead thrum, a beacon she could no longer ignore. Centuries in the dark had not just taught her the dead tongues. They had woven something deeper into her soul, a gift born of the forbidden bite that twisted her blood. She had always sensed it, a whisper in the silence of her servitude, but rejection had silenced it. deeming her unworthy of any light beyond survival. Now, with the chamber's hush broken only by the wind's lament, the gift stirred, unbidden and fierce. As her touch lingered on the scrolls, the glyphs ignited, not with flame, but with an ethereal glow, silver-blue light weaving from the ink like moonlight threading through clouds. The air thickened, charged with an ancient power that raised the hairs on her arms, the scent of ozone and wild earth flooding the space. Ilara gasped, her vision blurring as fragments of the past flooded her mind. Visions of Thorn's ancestors under a blood moon, the first king's betrayal of the Omega Seer, her lifeblood spilled to forge an empire, only to curse it with eternal winter. But deeper still, the revelation bloomed, a path forward, hidden in the seer's final prophecy. The curse could only shatter through one marked by exile, whose cold blood held the key to thawing the frost. A vampire Omega, reader of shadows, bearer of the Elder's crimson legacy. She spoke then, her voice emerging not as her own, but as an echo from the depths, resonant and otherworldly. "The Deusa's pact demands a bridge between worlds," she intoned, the words flowing unbidden, laced with the locket's pulse. "Blood of the rejected, heart of the haunted, one who reads the veins of history to mend the tear. The king's guilt is the lock, her sight, the key, union under the fractured moon, or the realm falls to endless night." The light intensified, projecting spectral images onto the walls. Thorn's mate falling in the snow, her eyes pleading, rival packs circling the citadel like shadows. And then, a vision of him and Ilara, hands clasped over the scrolls, the curse unraveling in threads of silver and red. Thorn staggered back, his breath ragged, the torchlight catching the awe and terror in his eyes. He had sought a reader, a mere interpreter, but this was destiny unveiled, raw and unrelenting. The melancholy that cloaked him cracked, guilt surging like a tide as the visions pierced his soul. His mate's death had been no accident. It was the curse's culmination, a betrayal woven into his line's fabric, demanding he confront the power he wielded through compassion, not conquest. And she, the slave he had overlooked in his desperation, was the pivot, the Omega whose rejection echoed the seers, her vampiric gift, a divine irony, turning abomination into salvation. You are the one," he whispered, his voice breaking on the words, as if admitting it aloud shattered the walls of his isolation. He reached for her again, this time cupping her face with scarred hands, thumbs tracing the chill of her cheeks. The pull between them intensified, instinctive yet resisted, a bond that rationalized itself as fate's cruel jest. Ilara recoiled inwardly, the revelation a double-edged blade. Her gift, long dormant, now exposed her fully. The hunger it stirred, the vulnerability of being seen as more than chains and shadows. What was strength, if not choosing to embrace a destiny that bound her to the very hierarchy that had cast her out? Tears, cold and translucent, welled in her eyes, unbidden, as the locket's warmth spread through her chest, thawing the frost of centuries. Empathy for him flooded her, the Alpha King, ethical to his core, yet haunted by duties that devoured his peace. In his gaze, she saw not pity, but recognition, a shared wound, the possibility of redemption through each other. Yet doubt lingered, sharp as the wind's howl, whispering of the perils ahead. His court would never accept a vampire Omega as the key, and rivals would hunt her as the threat to their ambitions. The glow faded, leaving the chamber dimmer, the snow thicker now, blanketing the scrolls in fragile white. Thorn pulled her to her feet, their bodies close in the confined space, his warmth a stark contrast to her chill. "This changes everything," he murmured, his breath stirring the strands of her dark hair. "You are no slave, Ilara. You are the pathfinder, the one the Deusa chose to heal what I broke." But even as he spoke, footsteps echoed anew from the corridors, not enemies this time, but his own guards, drawn by the commotion. The refuge shattered, the revelation hanging between them like a fragile truce, demanding choices that could forge or fracture their souls. In the moon's fractured gaze, Alara felt the weight of her emerging power, a light in the dark that both terrified and liberated. Tenderness bloomed amid the pain, resisted yet inevitable, as the wind carried weavos of warning from the peaks. The locket pulsed once more, a crimson heartbeat binding them, urging toward a destiny neither could deny. Yet the ethical precipice loomed. Could she trust the king with her truth when power and compassion so often warred? The night deepened, shadows lengthening as the first guards breached the threshold, their eyes widening at the scene. King and outcast, entwined in the aftermath of revelation. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The guards burst into the archive like a gale through shattered ice, their armored forms silhouetted against the torchlight from the corridor, eyes narrowing at the tableau before them. Thorn, the Alpha King, his bloodied hand still lingering near Ilara's face, and the fallen intruders shrouded in snow. The air thickened with tension, the metallic tang of fresh wounds clashing with the ozone residue of the scroll's fading glow. Ilara's chains clinked softly as she stepped back, the locket at her throat a searing ember against her skin, its crimson pulse syncing with the frantic rhythm of her thoughts. Revelation had stripped her bare, exposing the gift she had buried beneath centuries of shame. But now the past clawed its way in, demanding reckoning under the fractured moon's indifferent gaze. Thorn straightened, his storm-gray eyes hardening into the mask of sovereignty he wore like a second skin. "Stand down," he commanded, his voice a low thunder that reverberated off the vaulted stones, silencing the guards' murmurs. They hesitated, spears lowering fractionally, but suspicion etched their faces. Loyal betas from his inner circle, scarred by the same betrayals that haunted their king. Among them loomed Garrick, Thorn's once-trusted advisor, his lean frame cloaked in silver fur trim, eyes like chips of flint darting between the scrolls and Alara. The traitor. She realized with a chill deeper than her undead veins, the one whose whispers had poisoned the court after the mate's death, turning grief into fracture. His scent carried the faint rot of ambition, a rival alpha's shadow puppeteering from afar. "My liege," Garrick said, his tone smooth as oiled steel, stepping forward with feigned deference. "We heard the clash, spies in the sanctum, and this. Enslave?" His gaze raked over Alara, lingering on her pale skin and the silver collar, disgust curling his lip. "A vampire abomination meddling with the Deuce's words? The pack will not abide such taint." The other guards shifted, growls rumbling low, the wind outside whipping snow through the slits in furious spirals, as if the mountains themselves echoed their unrest. Howls rose from the citadel's outer walls, distant yet insistent, the Matilha stirring like a beast roused from slumber. Rivals, the Silverfang Alpha, Vortigern, whose pack had long coveted Blackthorn lands, would seize this chaos, painting Thorn's desperation as weakness. Alara's breath caught, ethereal wisps forming in the frost-laden air, her emerald eyes flicking to Thorn. The connection between them thrummed, fragile and resisted, a bond forged in blood and shadow that now teetered on the precipice. She could flee into the deeper archives, her vampiric grace a whisper in the dark, claiming freedom in solitude rather than risk the pack's wrath. The locket burned hotter, urging her to stand, its crimson stain a reminder of the elder's legacy, the rejected blood that had birthed her gift. But love, or what stirred in its guise, whispered of union, to heal the king's guilt, to choose compassion over the isolation that had defined her exile. What was strength, if not forgiving the world that had forsaken her, even as it bared its fangs once more? Thorn's hand clenched at his side, blood dripping from his wounds to stain the snow-dusted floor in dark petals, mirroring the locket's heart. Guilt surged within him, a tidal wave crashing against the ethical core that had guided his rule. He had rejected mercy once, after his mate's fall, allowing paranoia to fracture his pack. Garrick's betrayal had been the fruit of that soil, Vortigern's spies the inevitable harvest. Now, Alara stood as the key, the pathfinder whose sight could redeem his line. But to claim her meant war with the old order, forgiveness for the outcast over vengeance against the traitor. His melancholy eyes met hers, a silent plea amid the storm. Choose me, as I choose you, beyond the chains of duty and shame. Garrick seized the moment, his voice rising like a howl on the wind. The curse festers because of such folly, sire. This bloodsucker twists the scrolls, Vortigern's agents whisper of her kind infiltrating our borders. Banish her now, or the Matilha rises against you. The guards murmured assent, spears tightening in grips, the air electric with the scent of impending blood. Outside, the howls crescendoed, Vortigern's pack testing the gates. Their alpha's challenge, a guttural roar that shook the citadel's foundations. Snow lashed the windows, veiling the moon in white fury, as if the Dusa herself wept for the choices unfolding. Alara's mind raced, the visions from the scrolls replaying in spectral flashes. The first king's betrayal, the Omega Seer's spilled blood cursing the realm. Thorn's mate, dying with eyes that forgave even as they accused. Her gift hummed, revealing Garrick's treachery in stark clarity, his secret pacts with Vortigern, trading Blackthorn's secrets for a rival throne. Freedom tempted her, a solitary path into the shadowed wilds, where no alpha's pull could bind her wandering soul. Yet the tenderness that had bloomed in the refuge, amid the fight and the glow, resisted erasure. It was redemption's proof, not a prize, demanding she confront the past, not with flight, but with truth. Love or liberty. Forgiveness, weaving the pack anew, or war, shattering it in crimson waves. She stepped forward, chains dragging like echoes of her resolve, her voice cutting through the din like moonlight piercing cloud. He lies, my king. The scrolls name him, Garrick, the serpent in your council, allying with Vortigern to claim the curse as his crown. The words spilled from her, laced with the locket's pulse, the air shimmering as faint glyphs reformed on the hides, projecting Garrick's shadowed meetings in ethereal light. Gasps rippled through the guards, betrayal's sting sharpening their growls toward the advisor. Garrick snarled, lunging with a hidden dagger, but Thorn intercepted, his body a wall of fury and sorrow. They clashed in a blur of claws and steel, the king's movements precise, yet haunted, each strike a catharsis for the guilt that had chained him. Blood sprayed warm and vital, splattering Alara's cloak, awakening her hunger even as empathy flooded her. The Alpha's ethical heart refusing a killing blow, offering instead a chance for confession. "Why?" Thorn demanded, pinning Garrick against the pedestal, the traitor's face contorted in rage and fear. "For power? After all I gave?" The advisor spat, eyes wild. "You weakened us with your grief, Blackthorn. Vortigern offers strength, war to purge the curse, not this mystic drivel from a slave." The howls outside swelled, the citadel gates groaning under assault, snow and blood mingling in the chamber as guards turned on their former kin. Ilara's hand found Thorn's arm, her touch cool against his fevered skin, steadying him in the moral storm. Forgiveness or war? The choice loomed, her gift illuminating the path. Spare Garrick, bind the pack through mercy, and embrace the union that could thaw the frost, or unleash vengeance, claiming liberty in the chaos, but dooming the realm to endless night. The locket thrummed, crimson threads weaving between them as the moon fractured further, casting silver shards on the unfolding judgment. Tenderness amid the pain held her there, resisted no longer, yet the ethical precipice yawned wide. Could redemption bloom from such fractured soil, or would blood claim its due? Thorn hesitated, his breath ragged, the wind's wail a chorus to the dilemma etching his soul. Ilara's gaze held his, a silent vow in the gathering storm, as the first cracks of battle echoed from below. Vortigern's forces breaching the walls, the Matilla's fate hanging on the knife's edge of compassion. In that visceral hush, before the war fully ignited, she whispered, "Choose mercy, and I will walk with you." The words hung, a fragile bridge over the abyss, as shadows lengthened and the night demanded its toll. The wind screamed through the citadel's breached walls like the Deuce's own fury, carrying the clamor of battle, clashing steel, guttural roars, and the wet crunch of bodies yielding to fangs and claws. Snow lashed the archive in horizontal veils, mingling with the blood that slicked the stones, turning the chamber into a frozen tableau of judgment. Ilara's whisper hung between them, fragile as a thread of moonlight. "Choose mercy, and I will walk with you." Her hand on Thorn's arm trembled, cool against the fevered heat of his skin. The locket at her throat a crimson heartbeat, urging resolution amid the chaos. Fear coiled in her chest, not of the encroaching war, but of the vulnerability blooming within. The Omega's pull toward this haunted king, resisted through centuries of isolation, now demanding acceptance as the price of rebirth. Thorn's storm-gray eyes locked onto hers, the weight of his guilt fracturing like ice under pressure. Garrick writhed beneath his grip, the traitor's face a mask of snarling defiance, blood bubbling from his lips where Thorn's claws had grazed. The advisor's betrayal laid bare by Ilara's gift, the spectral glyphs still flickering on the scrolls, illuminating his pacts with Vortigern in unforgiving silver, had ignited the guard's rage. They turned as one, spears thrusting into Garrick's flanks, not with killing intent, but to subdue, their loyalty to the king, a fragile dam against the flood of war. "Mercy," Thorn echoed, his voice a ragged growl that cut through the din, releasing Garrick to the guard's custody. The advisor slumped, bound in chains like echoes of Ilara's own, his eyes wide with the shock of survival. Power or compassion? The choice carved into Thorn's soul, ethical to the core, choosing the harder path. Forgiveness as the forge of a renewed pack, not vengeance's pyre. But the night demanded more. From the corridor beyond, the battle's roar swelled. Vortigern's forces pouring through the gates, their howls a cacophony that drowned the wind's wail. Fire erupted in the lower halls, orange tongues licking the ice-veined walls, casting erratic shadows that danced like vengeful spirits. Thorn pulled Ilara close, his arm encircling her waist, the warmth of his body a stark shield against her chill. The instinctive bond surged, no longer denied. It was redemption's proof, a union born of shared wounds, rationalized no longer as fate's jest, but as the Deuce's deliberate weave. "You are my pathfinder," he murmured against her hair, his breath stirring the dark strands, scented with pine and the faint coppery tang of his blood. "In you, I see the healing I could not claim alone." Tenderness pierced the pain, a slow thaw in her frost-bound heart, the locket pulsing in harmony with the distant thunder of the fray. They moved as one, descending the spiral stair into the citadel's heart, where the war unfolded in visceral splendor. Snow blanketed the grand hall in drifts, trampled under paw and boot, blood steaming where it met the cold stone. Torchlight flickered wildly, illuminating the melee. Blackthorn warriors clashing with Silver Fang invaders, fur matted red, eyes wild under the fractured moon's gaze, filtering through shattered skylights. Vortigern himself loomed at the fore, a colossal alpha with pelt like molten silver, his roar shaking the rafters as he cleaved through Thorn's line. The air reeked of sweat and iron, the metallic bite sharpening Ilara's hunger, but she quelled it, her gift awakening fully now, a seer's vision threading through the chaos, revealing paths unseen. The locket burned like a brand, its crimson core igniting visions that overlaid the slaughter, threads of destiny weaving between fallen foes, opportunities for mercy amid the blood. Ilara's voice rose unbidden, an incantation from the scrolls spilling from her lips, laced with vampiric resonance. By the Deuce's blood and moon's fracture, let the curse yield to the rejected's light. Silver light bloomed from her touch on Thorn's torque, spreading like veins of thaw across the hall. Warriors paused, mid-strike, as the eternal frost in their souls cracked, guilt and rage giving way to clarity, the pack's fracture mending in ethereal glow. Vortigern staggered, his ambition's fire dimming as the visions assailed him. His own betrayals mirrored in the first king's sin, the cost of power without compassion etched in crimson prophecy. Thorn charged forward, Alara at his side, her chains shattered by the light's surge, a symbolic breaking, freedom claimed not in solitude, but in union. They confronted Vortigern together, the rival Alpha's blade raised high. But Thorn did not strike to kill. Instead, he extended his scarred hand, echoing the proclamation that had drawn her from the shadows. Join us, or fall to the night you helped forge. The choice hung, moral and raw, as Alara's gift projected the realm's fate. Endless war in blood-soaked snow, or rebirth through alliance, the curse's frost yielding to compassionate rule. Vortigern hesitated, his eyes flickering with the melancholy of a soul glimpsing redemption's edge, then lowered his weapon, kneeling in the gathering silence. The howls shifted from fury to wary accord, the packs converging under the moon's watchful eye. In the hush that followed, as snow settled like benediction over the wounded hall, Thorn turned to Alara. Firelight played across his features, softening the lines of guilt, his hand cupping her face once more. I offer you my hand, not as king, but as one redeemed. She accepted, her pale fingers intertwining with his, the locket's warmth spreading through them both. A healing current, sacrifice in vulnerability, union as the ultimate rebirth. The Omega in her, long rejected, found its place. The Alpha's duty, once a chain of sorrow, became a vow of shared light. Love was no reward, but proof. In choosing each other, they mended the tear between worlds, the Deuce's symbols, moon, fire, blood, bearing witness to their renascimento. The citadel stood renewed under the mending sky, frost receding as dawn's first blush kissed the peaks. Alara felt the stirrings of true warmth in her veins, the curse's hold loosening. Destiny embraced over despair. Yet the ethical echo lingered. Strength lay in mercy's crown, compassion's quiet fire outshining war's blaze. Together they stepped into the light, the locket a talisman of their bond, whispering of wounds healed and souls reborn. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.